Hi, I'd like to just welcome everybody to the World Media Group's 2021. You that have been with us before, welcome back. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, we hope you stay with us through the course of this year. For those that don't know me, my name's Damian Douglas. I'm Managing Director at Time. I'm now President of the World Media Group. I just wanted to start by thanking my predecessor, Alex Delamain, for taking the role for the last 2 years. I'm half as ambitious and half as thoughtful as she was. We'll have some great conversations this year. What the World Media Group represents as a body is incredibly valuable. The world has never needed progressive reasoning more than it does right now, and the perspectives our journalists provide are hugely important. Our titles continue to help people navigate one of the most disrupted periods in our history, and that is something everybody that is part of this community should be proud of. Katya Ionova from The Insider is going to introduce and chair today's conversation, which is sustainability from pledges to progress. The UN used this phrase, a decade of action, as we push forward towards 2030 and a plan to deliver social development goals targeting equality, poverty, health, growth, and sustainability. All of these challenges are globally interconnected and require collective action from both public, private, and individuals. November's rescheduled COP26 summit delivers some real focus at the end of this year, as does the World Economic Forum, which has been rearranged for Singapore in August. So how are we resetting? What roles are these brands playing today? Katya will guide us through this for the next hour or so. But before she does, I just wanted to remind everybody that our next conversation is March 30th, and we'll look at what a cookieless future looks like for the media world. And there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, so please submit ongoing throughout, and we'll try to get to these at the end. If anybody wants to use hashtags, do use hashtag WMG sustainability. But without further ado, Katya, the panel is all yours.
Thank you, Damian. Welcome, everyone. Delighted to moderate today's very important and timely conversation on sustainability, and we have a fantastic panel. We have representative from one of the most sustainable companies in the world. We have a representative from the one of the leading global financial institutions with a commitment to nearly $1 trillion in sustainable finance investments. We have a global leader in consulting and technology transformation, and of course, one of our members representing the media organizations, World Media Group. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Today we have Santosh Sedamadavan, Global Head of Marketing Communications B2B at HSBC. Devapriya Das, Senior Communications Advisor for Marketing Communications and Sustainability at Ørsted. Emmanuel Lachon, Chief Marketing Officer at Capgemini Invest. And Sofia Lotte Persio, Assistant Editor at Forbes. I'd like to sort of set the timing rules. We will, our speakers first will introduce themselves and explain the role of sustainability communications in their businesses. Then we will move into a panel discussion. And then at around 1:30, we will move to questions from our audience. So please prepare your questions and submit them through the chat on the app. And without further ado, I'd like to go first to Sofia, and if you can talk to us about what sustainability means for Forbes.
Thank you, Katya. I'm Sofia Lotte Persio. I'm an assistant editor at the Forbes newsroom in London. Not many people know that Forbes has a bureau in London, but we're here. And Forbes is known as a leading publication when it comes to covering business entrepreneurship and all the challenges the businesses face. And we've had a leading role in discussing issues of gender and race in the workplace with initiatives like Forbes Women and Forbes The Culture, which launched last year. But I really felt that sustainability and climate change in general was a big challenge for business that deserved to have a kind of focused coverage as we do for the other global challenges that we tackle in our publication. Forbes has been covering issues pertaining to sustainability for a long time, but these will have been divided across channels because the publication tends to divide itself across several verticals like business and finance and lifestyle. And this was creating a bit of a dispersive arrangement in the presentation of news that business leaders may be interested in when it comes to sustainability. And so hopefully by the end of the month, we'll be launching a sustainability channel within our vertical of innovation that will showcase an intersectional approach to sustainability coverage, which I think is really one of the big new developments when it comes to awareness of sustainability issues, that they're not just issues that businesses will tackle within their own sector, whether this may be fashion or energy, but it's something that needs a holistic approach and needs players from all industries to get involved and share knowledge and share awareness and best practices. So we're really excited to create this space within Forbes, and we'll be following this space with a lot of interest in the coming year for sure, and for much longer than that as well. Thank you, Katya.
Thank you very much. Now over to Santosh.
Thanks, Katya. So I'm just going to begin with maybe some context might be helpful for the HSBC kind of view on this and what we're doing right now. So to provide a bit of context, I work on marcoms for our B2B segment. So I'll speak particularly from that perspective. And, you know, as most stories in marketing begin, mine begins with clients, obviously. And so as far as sustainability is concerned, what we're increasingly sort of finding from client conversations and research is that businesses the world over are under increasing pressure from customers, shareholders, regulators to be more sustainable. And that's not just from an environmental perspective, but also from an ESG perspective. And many sort of corporates have already begun their transition to a more sustainable model some time ago and are deep in that journey already. But there's a very sort of vast majority of businesses that haven't even started. They want to make the change, but they just don't know how to get started and they need help. What doesn't help things, I guess, also is that there's a sort of growing narrative about how business is part of the problem. But genuinely, I think, you know, what we've seen throughout history is that, the impact that happens when businesses make change. New technology is made more scalable, is made more available, communities thrive, the environment replenishes itself. So we see businesses definitely as an agent for good and definitely a change agent that can bring that acceleration to the conversation and to the actual sort of transition around the world. And so with that in mind, what we've done is we've launched something called Business Plan for the Planet. At the heart of this idea is that business can be part of the solution, not the problem. And to help our clients effect change, not just in themselves, but also in the supply chains that they service, and that they can transition can happen right across that whole sort of the whole sort of process there. But we've also made commitments of our own, and hopefully everyone here would have seen some of our top of house commitments that we made last year. About how we will ourselves gradually transition our portfolio to net zero. But as with most sort of financial service providers, our fate is deeply intertwined with that of our clients. And as part of the program, we're committing our resources and our expertise to supporting our clients and make changes that they clearly wish to, support them make the change that they clearly wish to make. So I guess, as any decent marketer would, I have a really, really quick video to show everyone that maybe brings this to life a little bit. So if you just play the video and then I'll just come back and wrap up so we can hand over to the next speaker.
We all know what's going on. Millions of voices tell us every day. What we need more than ever is action. We need a game plan. We need ideas that deliver a future of sustained prosperity for us all. We need a business plan for the planet. Because business does. Because business solves problems. Business innovates because business acts globally. Business knows the meaning of now. Business has an eye on the future. At HSBC, we're committing between $750 billion and $1 trillion to drive sustainable transitions over the next 9 years and to support our clients all over the planet and their networks to thrive in a low-carbon economy. HSBC's target is for our own operations and supply chain to reach net zero by 2030 and to help all of our customers achieve the same goal by 2050. We believe that business can be part of the solution. If you do too, join us. Visit business.hsbc.com/BPFP.
So a little bit of show and tell there. I guess as a campaign, I think what's important to say is that there are several marketing elements included in that overall program. But ultimately, what it needs is strong leadership, commitment, and collaboration across the organization to make this a reality. And without that, it becomes a hollow promise and maybe just another nice marketing campaign. The real difference at the heart of business plan is real change and scalable change. So change that will impact communities, the environment, and ultimately businesses the world over. So, in order for this to transcend from just a campaign to a real program, it needs to foster client conversations. It needs to empower our teams to enable clients to make that change. And that's really the sort of crux of our focus through this. Thanks.
Thanks, Santosh. Dev, over to you. Very excited to hear from you as Ørsted, one of the most interesting examples of sustainability transformation. So how did you achieve that?
Thank you so much, Katya, and thank you also, Santosh. A great way for me to actually step into my own presentation today. I'd like to take it one step up and say to you that it's not just about the business. We're actually facing a very, very fundamental crisis globally, and as a species, humanity. We are living in what is quite clearly the Anthropocene. We have left our footprint all over the planet. That gives us not only a responsibility, but also an opportunity to actually make some very bold moves to ensure that the planet improves, stays the way it is, and that we save it for our children and our grandchildren. We are actually facing some of the biggest challenges ever on Earth today. As far as we're concerned in Ørsted, the biggest challenge facing us is the climate crisis. We know that in the next 9 years, as humanity, we have to cut global carbon emissions by 50%. So cut them in half by 2030, bring them down to zero by 2050 to ensure that we keep global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And you see right there, you have the challenge of the sustainability communicator. How do we tell this story easily to a diversity of audiences, whether they're investors, people who want to buy green energy to make their businesses cleaner, just the general public, people in academia who actually work with climate issues, or the politicians who actually need to be convinced that you need to build green energy faster, bigger, and across the world. So perhaps, Sam, I could ask you to put up the slide deck for me. Thank you so much. Our vision at Ørsted is let's create a world that runs entirely on green energy. That's a pretty bold vision, considering that about a decade and a half ago, Ørsted was one of the most carbon-intense energy utilities in Europe. It was contributing about 53% of Danish carbon emissions. Now, today, about 14 years later, we've undergone a fundamental transformation. We have reduced our carbon emissions by 87% since 2006. 90% of our energy is generated from renewable sources, mainly offshore wind, but as well as from onshore, as well as solar. And the energy that we've installed, it can power about 19 million people today from green energy sources. And we today have one of the more ambitious investment programs in green energy. We're investing about $30 billion exclusively in renewables towards 2025. That was actually perhaps the biggest investment program until a couple of years ago, when many of the traditional fossil fuel players, particularly in the oil and gas industry, realized that they would also like to take a bite of the renewable energy pie and have begun investing at an even higher level now, trying to catch up. Perhaps one final bit of branding for ourselves is we were ranked the most sustainable energy company 3 years in a row by Corporate Knights, which runs the Global 100 Index of the world's most sustainable companies, and was actually the most sustainable company in 2020. And we've got there by, first of all, and here perhaps I should take you to the next slide. Let me just tell you a bit about the business here first. I hope you can see my slide there. So we have three key markets, the main one being offshore wind, the other one being onshore, and the final one being small business in bioenergy as well as energy trading. And with this, we are coming out to several regions of the world, notably continental Europe, the UK, North America. And if I could just show you the last slide here, we have two key targets ahead of us. Firstly, by 2025, we're going to be carbon neutral in energy generation and operations. We're already 90% of the way there. And we, as Sophia also pointed out, we're very cognizant of the fact that becoming sustainable is not just about changing your own business. It's about changing the partners you work with, changing the impact you have on the globe. And for us, this has translated into a very significant target, which is that we want to be net zero by 2040. That is 10 years faster than the global target. It also requires that we get a carbon neutral supply chain. This is a huge challenge because that supply chain consists of steel manufacturers, people who produce components for offshore wind farms. It's all the emissions that come when you transport the elements of offshore wind farms, onshore wind farms around. Nobody has yet come up with good answers for how can you decarbonize steel? How can you decarbonize all the fuel that you need to transport, for example, oceanic shipping or trucking? But the fact is that businesses are in a unique position. They can demand green, they can demand low carbon solutions. And by increasing that demand pool, they actually put pressure on suppliers, on innovators to come up with the right low carbon solutions. If and I think Sam, I think maybe you could switch off the slides as well now. I think we're done there. What's interesting here in terms of sustainability communication, and I would like to share with you a quick analogy. You know, I come from India. I grew up many years in Mumbai, and it's a bit like taking the local train in Mumbai. When you see that local train pulling into the station, it's packed. You're not trying to think about getting a seat on that train initially when it comes to your communication. You just want to get a foot in the door. And once you've got a foot in the door, you kind of work your way in. And then maybe if you're lucky, you get a seat at the front of the wagon. And for me, sustainability communication has been a journey of that, trying to get a seat at the front of the wagon, where you initially come up with lots of credible, consistent communication. You stick to the facts. Try to talk about what have you actually changed in your business. I mentioned to you how much we've actually decarbonized over the years, how many gigawatts of energy we've actually installed. We try to put that into context. The fact that we have to, to avoid greenwashing, we have to take great pains to show how much have we actually reduced in terms of our emissions, but also how are we actually contributing to an accelerated build out of green energy. And I think in as much as numbers can be tedious and facts can be very heavy, we need them to support our story. But ultimately, I think what's most important is we have to figure out, why does this make a difference to the people we talk to? Are we trying, for instance, with investors, trying to get them to see the value of investing in green sectors? With politicians, are we trying to get them to understand how can green energy, and particularly offshore wind, help you to cut carbon emissions at grand scale in your countries? And we also have to stay a bit humble. Renewable energy constitutes about 11% of global energy today. So we've got quite a journey ahead of us. But what we do know is that by 2030, we could see maybe up to 4,300 gigawatts of green energy. That's just solar and wind deployed across the world by many different actors, of course, not only Ørsted. And that means that we are standing on the cusp of an unprecedented build out of green energy. We have an enormous opportunity. We actually have a chance to maybe even meet the 1.5 degrees target that we've set for ourselves as humanity. But how do we then bring people along on that journey and keep consistent? That's our challenge.
Thank you, Dev. Also interesting, you brought up steel, and our webinar today coincides with the official publication date for Bill Gates' new book, How to Avoid the Climate Crisis. And he actually references that, many of us might assume that agriculture, transportation are the biggest carbon polluters, but he actually brings up steel and cement and other carbon-intensive industries are the biggest challenge for sustainability transformation. And so it's over to Emmanuel, because Capgemini works with companies across many different industries. So how do you help your clients to lead sustainability transformation? What sustainability means for Capgemini?
Thank you very much. And indeed, it's a very good transition because recently worked with the Gates Foundation on a report. I will give you more insights in the coming minutes on that. So I'm the CMO of Capgemini Invent, which is a digital innovation consulting and transformation business unit of Capgemini Group. We are a pretty big group, nearly 300,000 people. So as you can imagine, sustainability and ESG in general is for us a key topic. It's a key topic at different level. So it's a key topic for ourselves, as our ESG strategy includes these environment sustainable aspects on top of diversity and inclusion and digital inclusion. We have been defining ourselves for several years now as what we call architects of a positive futures, which is very much in line with the purpose, the raison d'être that the group has freshly launched, which is about unleashing human energy through technology. Technology is definitely at the heart of what we are doing for an inclusive and sustainable future. So sustainability is mission critical. It's mission critical for ourselves, and it's mission critical for our business. So what Dave and Santosh was just saying was very much resonating with me and with Capgemini, as we have got partners and clients in the energy world. We have got a lot of clients in the financial services world as well. And not only we are applying this sustainability strategy for ourselves by defining, by communicating a very ambitious and very clear ambition for ourselves on the carbon neutrality, for instance, giving us an objective of becoming carbon neutral for our operation by 2025. So it's literally tomorrow. And even giving ourselves a target of becoming net zero by 2030. So it's always a little bit of a race, and this net zero objective is 2030, 2040, 2050. Well, it's I think that what is important is to have very clear action plan and very very strong way to measure these actions towards the objective. I'd like to just share with you a video. I'm just going to comment on this video. This video is the reference I was making with the Gates Foundation. One other aspect on top of having a clear corporate strategy is, I think, keeping track and continuously researching and I would say scanning the evolution of this sustainable topic. It's a moving target, if I may say, and one very important element is to look at the evolution of the stakes and making sure that us as a partner for our client can bring this knowledge and explain what is at stake. So what is at stake on the energy front, as Dave was saying, what is at stake on the mobility front, what is at stake in the circular economy and whatsoever. So as an example of this type of research that we are conducting and which are the basis of a lot of communication that we are sharing, and it's more than communication, it's insight that we are sharing, it's knowledge that we want clients and more generally people to get familiar with. This one is an example of a recent report that we initiated, that we developed for the Gates Foundation for an entity named Breakthrough Energy. So that's the entity that, Katia, you referred to a book that is going to be issued by Bill Gates, and this is one of the entity of the Gates Foundation that is working, that is very much cutting edge on all the new green energy and all the effort about turning energy in a cleaner one. So this report specifically is identifying 55 high-impact climate technology projects that can help Europe meet the 2050 net zero emission target. So that's super concrete. And one aspect of what we are developing within the group and that we are using in communication, okay, to connect back to the topic of today's webinar. So our sustainability strategy goes, as I said, with very concrete, very clear action for ourselves. It goes through the electrification of car fleet. It goes with the use of renewable energy. Like, for instance, the implementation of solar energy factories in our Bangalore. It's not Mumbai, but it's our Bangalore campus. So these are very concrete actions that we are putting in place as a corporation. As I was saying, for Capgemini, the sustainability topic is not one angle, it's multiple layers. So there is one aspect that is our own strategy. How are we going to become net zero by a certain date? And more importantly, Santosh was making the point with HSBC and their great campaign. For us, sustainability is also about helping our clients tackling their first sustainability challenges. Okay, so as I just described, we are continuously researching and looking at how the overall, I would say, the overall environment is evolving. The way this sustainability topic is evolving, and we can bring to clients some strategic, some design, some implementation support to make sure that they will be able also to put in place this their own strategy, sustainability strategy. It can go, for instance, with the development of a greener IT plan. It can go with the implementation of fully decarbonized business and operation. It can even go with like reimagining their business model, either from scratch or making their business model evolve. I'm thinking, for instance, at a recent project that we run with one of our partners called Volvo M, which is a subset of Volvo, with the imagination of a new mobility platform, shared mobility platform for the city of Stockholm. So as you can see, for us at Capgemini, it's not one way, it's multiple different levels, multiple different ways to I would say, achieve higher sustainability goal and to be able to communicate on very clear, very actionable, and very embodied activities and actions. Thanks a lot, Katja.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Thank you so much, everyone, for your introduction. I mean, it's incredible already the commitments made to net zero and reducing carbon footprint. But now I'd like us to move to a discussion and dig deeper into topics about the effectiveness of sustainability communication, what's working for you, which stakeholder groups you're targeting. And our first question is, what is the main objective of your sustainability communications? How do you avoid criticism? How do you avoid it being labeled greenwashing, etc.? How do you make it effective, essentially, and who do you communicate to? And I'd like to start with Santosh, please, because actually, while business plan is the new campaign for you, but sustainability has been a big focus for HSBC. I'm sure, like Damian, who is a frequent visitor to World Economic Forum in Davos, would have admired your pavilion for the last couple of years, which was always very focused on sustainability. So what have worked for you in the last couple of years? How have you changed your messaging and who you're communicating to now?
Well, thanks, Katja. I think you're right. I think, at HSBC, we've had a long history of commitment to sustainability. And, we have several sort of piece of evidence to point to, whether it's our green loans or whether it's our funds or whatever. And we've helped large companies sort of make that leap and make that transition for a long time now. In quarters, I think, of the industry, we are also considered to be leaders in the space. What we're sort of missing, I suppose, is true leadership in that space. I loved Dave's sort of analogy of the Bombay train, which I can totally relate to. It feels sustainability from a comms perspective feels like a very, very crowded train, and everyone and their uncle really is jumping on board and wants to say something about how great they are when it comes to sustainability. At HSBC, I think we've been sort of quietly confident, and we've been very sort of silently chipping away at that challenge. It's a huge challenge, and I think we're quite realistic about our place in the world. The reason we've now decided to be more overt about it is because we see it as a key priority of our clients as well. And as Emmanuel said also, supporting our clients is intrinsic to what we're doing. So I guess to answer your question, that's our history. That's where we are right now, and that's why we decided to go to market. But in order to avoid sort of greenwashing, action is key. Like most marketing, you'll have a mix of elements. Some of it will be fame driving, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you need to balance it out with more tangible, measurable outcome and action. It's fine for everyone to kind of stand up and say, look at how sustainable we are. It means nothing without real transition. And it's the right thing to do as a company. And as I said earlier, I don't think it's down to marketing to put out quote unquote advertising that talks about our merits as a sustainable organization. It truly happens when the organization comes together and we recognize it as a priority, and then the whole organization mobilizes in that direction. That's a sort of point at where HSBC is now, and we firmly believe it. We feel it in our bones. It's the right thing to do for our clients. And I think the other thing I'll just very quickly say as well is, I think someone on earlier before me said that that this is an unprecedented time, and there's a turn in the road now that's happened, and that's very much true. If you look at COVID, right? An interesting observation that we had for our clients as well is companies that actually had sustainability and ESG hard-coded in their DNA. Those are the companies that have actually come out of sort of the pandemic. Well, we're still in it, but where we are right now, come out with it fared better than most others, and it's down to their ability to pivot faster, for them to take their teams and their communities along as well into that change. And so it's not just a question of altruism, it's also a question of the bottom line. It makes sense for businesses to transition into that space. And I guess the program that we've launched now is a statement of support for businesses who want to do that. So I hope that answers your question, but it's sort of how we are very mindful about greenwashing. We don't want to be part of that, definitely. And I don't think we would have gone to market had we felt in any way what we were saying and doing was greenwashing.
No, definitely answers the question. And I think the key word here is very much action, whether it's dedicate for action. And I also like Dev on Orsted website. I really like that the very first thing you see on the menu on the navigation bar is act now. And I haven't really seen it on many corporate websites, such a strong call to action. But I wanted also to ask Sophia, in terms of the role of such an important media publication as Forbes, what do you see as your sort of mission in this sustainability conversation? How do you drive action with your audiences and with your readers?
I think that one of the key goals that we have in our sustainability coverage going forward is to provide clarity amid the noise. Going back to the analogy of the crowded Mumbai train, we want to be able to inform readers about what are the things that are working best and how things are working. And I think that is one of the issues that happens sometimes when you're covering an initiative from a company, is that the press release would just say, we've decided to create this goal and we'll be carbon neutral by 2030. But it's always lacking in the details as to how they're doing it. And so explaining the mechanism as to how this action happens, for me, is very important in our coverage. As well as to the point of avoiding greenwashing, I just wanted to add that action is obviously very important, but there's also has to be a certain cohesion and a certain consistency in what you're doing, because the actions that you're taking have to complement and support what your brand does. If your brand, is involved in the coffee space, then you should consider taking action that will create a more sustainable crop for coffee and a sustainable supply chain and more sustainable consumption, rather than maybe just thinking about other areas that are not necessarily pertaining to the business directly, but because maybe it looks good to think that you can plant trees in developing countries. But, while it's a catchy headline, perhaps does it really sustain your business goals, and does it make sense for the narrative that you're trying to put out? So I would definitely advise to be consistent in your communication and detailed as well, because publications like Forbes and others will always be asking you the question of how are you planning on achieving that? And the more details you can provide, the more credible your message will be as well.
Dav, Emmanuel, over to you, because as we were prepping for this event and now in your remarks, you also highlighted that it's not just communicating about your company, but it's also communicating across the whole value chain. So what messages are you putting in the market right now to encourage sustainability across the whole sort of ecosystem of clients and suppliers that you work with?
You want me to go first, Katya?
Yes,
okay.
Dave, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, it really, I think, thanks, Emmanuel. Also, I think it depends quite a bit on who are the audiences we're talking to. I think it really helps from the perspective of the communicator to know those audiences and to also know in advance, try to know what can they do with the information that you present them. Because, there is facts and then there's what we do with those facts. So to answer your question, let's say if we look at B2B companies, they're a prime group that could get on board the carbon reductions journey, and they can do that in a very quick way by procuring more green energy. In fact, it's one of the most tried and tested ways for companies to actually cut down their greenhouse gas emissions at a high pace. So communication that we do towards potential green energy clients is around the benefits of procuring green energy for your business. And those benefits are strategic, because you actually reduce risk, because you get stable, clean power for many years. And at the same time, you help the climate. But more than that, you are actually helping then to speak to your consumers or your end consumers' demands, because we can see more and more it's the end consumer that wants companies to show leadership and action, to get at the front of the train and show clearly how are they actually cutting their emissions. Here, I'd like to pick up on one point from Sophia made about planting trees. I mean, it is very clear that we are not going to be able to plant our way out of the climate crisis. There's simply not enough physical space on this planet to do that, to offset all the emissions. Much better to think about how do you actually cut those emissions at source. And it's kind of like a very important milestone was reached, I think, in October, when the Science Based Targets Initiative announced that 1,000 companies have actually now set science-based targets, and almost all of them are within the 2 degrees of warming scenario. And I read just this last week that apparently almost 60% are setting those targets in line with the 1.5 degrees pathway. It's an amazing achievement considering how quickly it's happened. It also shows that companies are realizing that they need to take decarbonization seriously and really try to cut down emissions at source. Another very major group for our communication is actually policymakers, regulators, because at the end of the day, energy is an enormous sector. It is highly regulated. We need to find ways of working with policymakers in different countries to figure out how can you provide clean energy at a stable price over a long time. One of the best examples of this is actually the UK government, which has more than, it's about 9 gigawatts, I think, of offshore wind in operation now. They have actually set very clear decarbonization targets. They were, I think, the first country to in law mandate having net zero. So when countries take leadership to reduce their emissions, they're sending a very clear signal to the market that, look, we're creating demand, and now come to us with your innovations, and then we can talk about how can we price this in the right way. So a lot of our communication is also about figuring out where can we meet national governments at the right level and help them to sort of embrace that decarbonization journey and make that happen at scale.
You mentioned targets, and I think with like our webinar promises to discuss from pledges to progress, and what we can't measure, we can't improve. So Emmanuel, like, how do you measure the impact of your sustainability communications? How do you advise your clients to actually track against the targets, or the progress against the targets? And which channels do you find to be most effective? Like you mentioned, the report you just published, that's quite substantial. Are there any other content formats that drive most effectiveness for you and for other speakers as well? And I'd like to remind to our audience, please submit questions. We'll be soon moving to the Q&A section, so please submit it on the chat.
Thanks, Katya. So I'm not going to go to go back on some of the points that Santosh made, but just one key element for us is indeed to communicate based on facts. That's really essential. So and we are far down the road of this fact communication, and we are lucky enough to have a very like a vast, massive quantity amount of research that we can rely on. So it helps us a lot. So research, facts, insights are definitely a key element of our content. On the other hand, what is also essential for us, we are first and foremost a people company, and so it's also very important to embody this communication. So it is not so much a corporate speaking to the world, but it's like individuals, actors of the sustainability path, sharing their experience, and to do such things, we are mobilizing a lot of our colleagues, either who are specialists in this domain of sustainability. So it's a very, very vast domain. We can see, for instance, that AI, artificial intelligence, can have a massive impact on improving sustainability or gas emission reduction, for instance. Just to see how the connection can be done between technology, AI, and sustainability objectives. You can see that it's a very, I would say, very rich, and the potential is vast. So embodiment is very important. And answering to your question about which channel and how to measure, well, when Bill Gates shared the report that we have been commissioned to produce with them, there have been like 22,000 likes. So I would say, what a better way to measure than looking at the engagement, looking at how people are reacting to this information, positively or negatively. But reaction is essential. So probably one learning out of that is to, as much as possible, to use a more direct channel to impact the audience. As Dave was saying, there are multiple audiences. It goes from the policymakers to the business decision makers to the future colleagues who we'd like to bring on board. So it's very vast. But one, I would say, one simple rule or one simple way to measure is to keep an eye on the engagement of the communication you are making. The social media channels today are terrific ways to be immediately, to be able to immediately see the reaction to what you are communicating. So that's, I would say, a kind of basic, but always good to remind everyone.
Terrific, thank you. We are just about to move to a Q&A session, but I just wanted to ask the final question to everyone on the panel. So this year, so again, focus on sustainability ahead of COP26 is making headlines. Sustainability is the new digital transformation, essentially. So how do you think COP26 will impact this decade for action? What are your expectations and for this event, and how you're adapting your communications in the light of this activity and race to net zero?
If you don't mind, Katja, I will just jump in at the beginning for this question. We are an important partner of the World Climate Summit, which is a side event taking place in parallel to the COP26 or the COP in general. So we started this engagement a couple of months ago, nearly 2 years ago. So for us, you were asking which type of action. For us, taking the floor and not only sponsoring, It's not about sponsoring. It's about taking part in it. So taking the floor, sharing this insights and knowledge that I was referring to in front of a panel of decision makers like the one you can see at the COP or at the World Climate Summit is also a very concrete and very direct way of involving ourselves. So we are doing these kind of things for sustainability with World Climate Summit. On other aspect of our ESG strategy, we tend to do the same thing. So being very concretely, engaging ourselves very concretely in with initiatives that, in our opinion, can make the things move concretely, can make the behavior and the kind of human beings change their way of acting. So that's you mentioned the COP26. There are ways to be to be concrete and to push and support like very concrete, actionable strategy and actionable, I would say, activities around this type of activities, this type of meetings. So hopefully, the COP will be able to meet again and to meet again soon after the Glasgow COVID stop, I would say, break.
Could I jump in there, Katya? I think talking about concrete action, that we'd just like policymakers to remember one thing. If there's one thing they remembered from COP26, it is that green energy is now cheaper than fossil fuels. It's cheaper than fossil fuels in 2/3 of the world's countries. It's been the case for at least the past 3 years. There is simply no economic reason not to act on the climate crisis. And if there's one message that should be taken away, especially by some of the emerging economies, it is that it is cheaper than fossil fuels. Whether you set a net zero target or not, it is immaterial if you actually start decarbonizing your energy systems, and you start doing that by choosing the renewable option rather than the fossil option. And I mean, Emmanuel picked up on several points there, but I mean, I think it's fair to say that we can't just take energy as one slice of the pie. It contributes about 73% of global carbon emissions, so we should really tackle it first. But there are many other things as well, and we know we can't electrify everything. So we need to also start thinking about what are the knock-on effects then. How do you decarbonize heavy transport? How do you decarbonize steel manufacture? How do we start decarbonizing agriculture? But I think the conversations at COP26 there has to be that recognition that we have the solutions today. The technologies are here. There is funding for it. Now it's up to regulators and policymakers to act. Just one thing I want to put on the table is perhaps the best time to have acted was 20 years ago when Al Gore lost the US election. I'm not sure we can have another failed summit, frankly. And I think there's a lot of momentum to make sure that this summit works out well. Whether it's virtual or not, I don't know. We have a new administration in the US. Perhaps that's going to be like the real sort of Kickstarter to get action going here.
It's true. It's 15 years since the Inconvenient Truth has been released, and also it's all in the name. It's COP26. The first convention took place over 26 years ago. So we've been talking a lot about climate, and hopefully this will bring the result. I'd like to move to the Q&A session now, and there are actually quite a few questions, but I'd like to start with Sophia, please. So the question is, what impact do you think Biden will have on corporate sustainability strategies in the US and around the world?
Well, I think that this is actually kind of been introduced by Dev in his comments just now, but and I echo that sentiment that the actions that Biden will take and that he has started taking by rejoining the Paris Agreement are hugely not just symbolic, but also are enabling this conversation to happen again in the US after a somewhat period of, I wouldn't say silence, but quiet. It was somewhat quiet. And I think that is, again, putting decarbonization on the top of the agenda. And as that happens, there are a lot of conversations happening. It's a topic that creates controversy these days. You have social media discussions going on. And And so it's one to keep an eye on. And as we are part of the World Media Group, I just want to reemphasize the importance of facts and verification and adding details. Also, if you're considering issuing any kind of communication around the COP26, remember, why is it relevant that you're doing this now, and why does it matter that this is being discussed in that kind of framework? Because people won't be aware that COP26 is happening. Like a random person on the street will most likely not know that that's happening. So never take that kind of information for granted. And so with the US rejoining the Paris Agreement and showing some leadership in this topic once again, I think that message will be more powerful and will echo more to the people, to normal people in the streets that are not necessarily concerned with this topic every day of their lives. And that said, even though during the Trump administration there was a certain quiet on the Western Front, so to speak, there was development happening throughout those years as well. In October next year, which is an energy company that has invested in renewable energy for a long time, surpassed ExxonMobil for market capitalization. Briefly, now they're kind of head-to-head, depending on the price of oil, but it was a very significant development. So, of course, political involvement and political leadership will help speed things up, because had this happened 20 years ago, perhaps we wouldn't be having these kind of discussions right now. But nonetheless, the demand is there, the technology is there. Like even if COP fails again, and hopefully not, there will be development in this space no matter what, because businesses will be part of that conversation, the media will be part of that conversation, and grassroots activists will be part of that conversation.
Thanks, Sophia. There is a lot of hope and for this administration to be known, and for this president to be known as the climate president. I've got a very interesting question to Santosh as well. So data indicates that if it were a country, the internet would be the 6th largest carbon emitter on the planet. How can the media marketing industry look to focus towards messaging on sustainability while also faced with the physical carbon cost of digital? Do you have any perspective?
I mean, you said interesting. You said interesting. I think that's an incredibly difficult question, actually. I think it's $1 million question or $1 billion question.
Good that you take it, Santosh.
Oh, there, see. It feels like $1 billion question, actually. I think, there are pockets of things, right? There are sort of online avenues now where your ad spend on digital, for example, goes back to good causes, for example, and there are things like that, but they feel very piecemeal. If I'm totally honest with you, Katja, I don't think that there's a solution for that yet. I think as Dave and as everyone else on the panel has said, I think there needs to be transition of some of these large industries into more greener, much more sustainably minded models. The internet, I think, is no different from any other thing, whether it's steel or whatever else. They need to be held to equally high standards as any other company, as HSBC for that matter. And I think while there is urgency around this, I think the other thing that we need to kind of be mindful about is transition. What gets lost in this conversation sometimes is celebration of transition. The goalpost is constantly moving, right? I love how people say, oh, our business is now sustainable. No, you're not. You're not sustainable. You never will be, because it's such an evolving conversation. It's such an evolving target. If you say that, you're probably not, you don't have the bigger picture really, and you don't have, maybe it's not as close to your purpose and values as a company and a brand as well. So I think if sectors like the internet or the other sectors start making transitions towards being more sustainable, if as us as marketers and advertisers try and find even small steps that can quantify and can make some kind of meaningful impact, I think we should celebrate those things. Those baby steps will lead to much faster strides, will lead to large change. I mean, I hate to bring her up, but everyone does. If you look at Greta Thunberg, for example, she was basically a schoolgirl who just kind of sat out school outside the parliament and just said, I'm not going back until you guys fix this. And today she's an icon. And again, it's back to purpose, right? It would have not been enough, frankly, if Greta Thunberg had just said that she wasn't going to school. But what she did is she's actually affecting change now, and she's actually starting conversation, and she's starting debate at the highest levels of government around the world. It's the same thing with everything else. all of this change needs to happen. We don't have the answer for some of these things now, but all I'm saying, I think, is that if we didn't even celebrate the small successes, the big change that's required will never come. So we need to celebrate small successes now. We need to challenge each other. We need to hold each other to higher standards. But in celebrating those successes, big change will happen and answers will come. Sorry, Katja, I hope that wasn't a cop-out. I mean, no pun intended, but
no, but it's an interesting question because there was also, well, interesting, challenging question. There was another question as well about this paradox of real action and commitments. And one of our participants was wondering if panel has any views on the actions of Tesla and their approach to sustainability, because while they're offering $100 million grants for carbon capture, at the same time they are investing in Bitcoin, which is very carbon intensive industry. But I think maybe we can, I don't know, if anybody has any strong views on Elon Musk and his vision for the future, please contribute. But I think there are a few other interesting questions I'd like to move on as well.
To build on Santosh's point, as Santosh was very rightly saying, first of all, it's a moving target. So things are evolving all the time. There will be new technologies or new habits or many different things that will make that will require each of us, everyone, to adapt and to most probably to adapt their strategy as well, and to just bring a little bit like one little element. We are speaking about balance here. We are speaking about balance between activities that are creating gas emission and potential action that can help reduce. So you were mentioning internet, you were mentioning mails, advertising, whatsoever, every activities that requires energy at some point. I think that the fact that some key players of this world, the GAFAM or others, you were mentioning Tesla, are also very sensitive of this challenge. There are some of them changing massively their way of managing their data. We know that data farms are massively consuming energy, and so this is going to also made possible by the change of habits and the I would say the action that will be decided by all the players of the digital world. And at the end of the day, it will be a balance. It will be a balance between what is consuming and what is sparing, in a sense. So we won't be able to clean everything. That's for sure. So we need to look at a positive balance, which will make us, I would say, preserving our planet at the end of the day.
If I may, just one more.
Sorry, Katja, just one other thing. I was just going to mention very quickly to Emmanuel's point as well about sort of, changes that are already happening. From our perspective, for example, we're seeing really interesting ideas coming out of really small businesses around the world right now. So, for example, there's a business in France, actually, that is revolutionizing supply chains for food to minimize food waste. One might argue that that's restricted to France or to Paris, but that scaled up around the world is a huge, gigantic movement, right? Similarly, there's a lovely story out of Australia. I love it. It's basically a self-sustaining farm. It's a dairy farm, and what they're doing is they're just using the manure from the cow, literally, putting that back into their business to fuel their processing line and their production and everything else. I just want to say, I guess, with these kind of changes, there is hope, right? I don't think everyone is going to get all of the answers, and no one is going to be 100% right 100% of the time. But I think with these kind of changes happening, I think it's quite promising. And forgive me, I might be I might be one of the few optimistic people about this. But these kind of things, I think, bode well for the future, and really, I think there's a lot to look forward to. I think there are people who are making this real change happen. So yeah, who knows how that's going to impact everything else.
I'd like to wrap up on this optimistic message of hope, and also it's not just you, also Bill Gates with his cautious optimism, etc. The questions that we haven't been answered, World Media Group will try to cover them in the future blog posts. But thanks so much for everyone participating in this discussion. I'd like to give the floor back to Damian to wrap up the key points of this day. Thank you for the panelists, and thank you to the audience.
Thank you very much
Thank you
for having us.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for giving their time. Extremely generous and extremely interesting. Just to quickly wrap, words that come up very often: action, innovation, leadership, interconnected, green transition, and commitment. Though I think the one consistent between the three businesses certainly that are talking today is this idea of enablement and how strong that enablement is. Whilst they're accountable to their own business, they're facilitating the ability for others to transition as well. And where that happens, I think that should be applauded across the board. I think having an agreeable consensus and plans in place that people are accountable to are increasingly important. And to touch on it, the last part before wrapping up, motive. And I think that's the one thing that we need to be conscious of with our marketing communications. Why are we attached to sustainability, and how accountable are we to our own actions? Because that determines motive. And as we all know from a marketing perspective, audiences look for genuine motive and authenticity at any point. So thank you again for all of your time today. That's been very interesting, and we do appreciate it. And to everybody else, we're going to come back on March 30th to talk about a very different subject, which is our cookieless future, but nonetheless incredibly interesting and important. So thanks, everybody, and we'll wrap up there.